Thanks for joining us today. We'll continue to keep it open for a few minutes before we kick this thing off. All right, so today's webinar, all the attendees, you guys are muted today. But if you'd like to participate, ask questions, jump in anytime, use the Q&A and ask you questions, and we're happy to address those as we go. All right, so it is lunchtime, and so we can't see you. You can just see us, so feel free to eat. Somebody's crunching away on pretzels, I'm being told, so feel free to eat and drink and enjoy your lunch while you learn. That's the goal of today. So no, we can't see you, so you're good to go. So thanks for joining us. As you saw from our invitation, today's topic is all about the personnel file. And while most business owners and HR people know that it's a critical thing to have in your organization, it can actually put you at risk. HR risk, legal risk, financial risk. There's a whole bunch of things that if you don't handle your personnel files correctly, can actually put you at deficit. And that's really what today is all about. We're going to talk about 3 key components of the HR or personnel file and learn a lot from our wonderful panelists that we have today. And so today's event is hosted by Garnett and Associates and PayThrive, and we'll let our panelists speak to who they are and what they do and how wonderful they really are here in a moment. So as I said, this is while this is a webinar, it's really an open discussion. So please use the chat feature, please use the Q&A feature for your questions so we can manage those. We will use the chat feature on and off throughout the webinar as well, but don't hesitate to raise your virtual hand or ask a question, and we'll make sure we address all of that stuff as we go. The session today is also being recorded too, so we will distribute the recording via probably an email link and or via LinkedIn as well. So if you're not connected to our 3 panelists on LinkedIn, please make sure you reach out and connect on LinkedIn as well. And so without any further ado, why don't we take a moment and have each of our panelists introduce themselves, tell us a little about yourself, and then we'll get into our first poll of our session. So Wes, let me hand it off to you.
Thanks, Dean, and thanks for all of the attendees. Wes Garnett, I own and operate W. Garnett and Associates. We're a human resource consulting firm. We help small to mid-sized company maneuver the state and federal compliance requirements.
Great, thanks, Wes. And John, you're next on my panel here, so I'll go around to you next.
Thank you, Dean. And yes, thank you everyone for attending. My name is John Bacon. I am president and founder of PayThrive. I am an HCM, PEO, and payroll broker. I independently represent 25 different service providers, a lot in Colorado, but actually all around the country. I have providers coast to coast, and I help people find the best performing providers in the marketplace and help negotiate pricing and give them a good experience.
Wonderful. Thanks, John. And Ron.
Yes, thank you, Dean. And again, good afternoon to all our attendees. My name is Ron Porter. I'm the Senior Associate Business Development, and I work with W. Garnett and Associates. I've been with Wes for now going on 10 years, and I specialize in I-9 compliance reviews, employee handbooks, employer handbooks, employee offer letters, and job descriptions. Those are just some of the things that I specialize in.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. Well, as you can tell, we've got some really experienced folks on the panel, a lot of insight, and sometimes the best way to get that insight is to ask questions. So I'll encourage the attendees again, ask questions throughout. We're happy to pause and get into a question or take a tangent, whatever you're going to get the most value out of today, we're happy to do so. And in that same frame, we've got a couple of very quick polls we wanted to do this morning, just to get some attendee, participation, give us a sense from the panelist perspective, kind of where you're at and where we can spend some time. So I'm going to launch our first poll here. So if everybody would just take 30 seconds and answer the first poll. Let me grab it here. There it is. Poll 1, launch the poll. Okay, so everybody should see our first poll. Super simple. Which is the most important document to have on file for every employee? So if you were going to rank it and pick the #1 most important document, which would it be? The I-9, the W-4, the job description, or the employer offer agreement? So please go ahead and click the button and let us know which one you think is the most important. All right, I've got a few votes coming in. Almost there. All right, there's 3 of you that can't hide. I know there's 3 more. All right, 2 more to go. Very good. Okay, so by a wide margin, the I-9, by all of our attendees' opinion, is the most important document to have for every employee. And second was the employer offer agreement, which was far less. We had 2 votes for that. We had 9 for the I-9, and then we had a couple of votes for the W-4 and the job description. But I-9 is the #1 vote. I'm not going to say which is the most important, because I'm going to let the panelists address that here in a moment. And so we're going to hop on to our second poll. And again, please cast your vote. So which document should not be kept in the personnel file? I-9, employee medical records, Colorado State Director of Hires form, or all of the above? Which one should not, which is your choice? Which should not be kept in the file? All right. So the employee medical records is winning. If this is a race, that horse would have won. So no one voted for I-9. We had 9 votes for the employee medical record should not be kept in the file. Nobody voted for the Colorado State Directory of New Hires, and 2 people voted for all of the above. Okay, so employee medical record clearly was the winner of that poll. So we know that let me end this poll here. So the attendees all voted for the I-9 as the most important, and do not keep your medical records in your personnel file. So again, I'm not going to divulge what I think is the correct answer. That's what the panelists are here for. So having said all that, we'll come back to those results here in a moment. But in the meantime, we'll kick this thing off. And really, Wes, let me address this question to you. You've been around a while. You've seen a lot of different things in terms of HR and personnel files in large corporations and in small. And we know we have to have personnel files, but there are always some gotchas, right? There are some things that you should do, things you shouldn't do. So maybe give us a few examples of some of the good and or more importantly, maybe the bad of the things that people do with their personnel files, and why today's topic is so important to business owners and HR leaders.
Good. Thanks, Dean. I have a couple of stories, real life stories I'd like to share, and I've classified them both as one good, one not so good. The good part of this scenario is the employee personnel file. We control that. We as employers control what we want agencies to see. So what we have to do is we have to identify what documents that are part of the employee's personnel file is important to me and the company. And we want to pre-package those documents in a folder. So whenever we have a new hire, all we have to do is grab that folder and implement that with the new hire. In 2019 and 2020, we had clients that were audited by the state Department of Labor. And the process that we've implemented inside of W.Garnett passed in both of those audits. So we have a proven, at least those 2, we have a proven remedy. The second story I'd like to share real quickly is the I-9. We have a client, we had a client in the Springs, owner and 5 employees. They got cited by the Department of Homeland Security, or ICE, for an I-9 audit. An owner and 5 employees. Ultimately, they were assessed by fines and violations of $80,000. $80,000 for 5 employees. When they contacted us, they had already submitted their work. We were able to intervene. We wrote a position to ICE on what the company would do from this point moving forward. ICE lowered that 85,000 down to 40. So they saved 45,000. But again, we have what we think is a great process for companies around their I-9s.
Wow. So that's amazing that ICE would even go and spend time and resources on such a small company. But when you can see the financial impact, it makes sense. So I'm sure that multiplies significantly. You know, you have a company that has 20 or 30 employees or 100 employees. The financial risk is just huge. And I don't think that generally, from my exposure to business owners, I don't think the I-9, not that it's not important, but they don't understand the impact, the financial impact that it can have on the organization.
You are correct.
Okay, good. Well, we do have a question already come in. Sarah asks, and we can table this for when we get to the personnel file discussion, or we can answer it now. I'll let you guys decide. So the question is this: do we have to have printed copies in a filing cabinet, or if the information is hosted on a payroll system, will that suffice for documentation that can be pulled? So I guess the question is, can we have electronic copies of the documents, or do we have to have printed copies somewhere?
I can jump in, and Ron and John, you guys can add to it. I know you could have both versions. You can have the documents either electronic, or you can have hard copies. But some of the documents, such as the I-9, you're going to have, if they're kept electronically, they're going to have to be presented in a small time window. So if you're keeping those electronically, make sure you can get to them in a pretty expedient period of time.
Gotcha. All right. So you have to be able to have access to those documents quickly.
Exactly.
And something else that makes me think of as well, Dean, is that in terms of the format of storing the data, that, you know, Wes is right. I mean, either format is fine. Some folks prefer to have paper, you know, documents on hand. Some folks prefer to go paperless. But beyond the issue of quick access, in case, you know, being able to get your hands on those in a quick turnaround, there's also the issue of just protecting that data. If it's paper, you know, a data breach can happen with paper, or it can happen electronically. I know a business referral partner of mine had a client in California that had the office broken into, and they went right for the personnel files, because that's where all the social security numbers are. That is worth far more to them in the long term than office equipment, computers.
Yeah.
I mean, unless there are hard drives with that same data. So if whatever you do, just store that data securely and consider data breach protection as far as insurance.
That's great point, John. Yeah, it's amazing. ID theft is a very valuable business for the right people, I guess. So, well, good. Thank you. Thanks for the question, Sarah. Okay, let's move on, because we do have lots to cover today. So I'm going to hand it off to Ron. And Ron, give us the sort of 10,000-foot view of the personnel file and what we should know and how we should think about it, please.
Okay. Thank you, Dean, and good afternoon, attendees. Here's some information I just want to share with you surrounding the employee personnel files. There are many reasons why companies should keep employee records on file. The most important reason is that it's required by law. Companies must also keep financial documents on hand in the event of a lawsuit or an audit from the Internal Revenue Service. Dean, if you could pull up that matrix of the employee personnel file.
Absolutely.
So let's
Let me share my screen
just now
here.
briefly discuss that matrix of the employer personnel file.
Ron, I just want to make sure everybody can see the matrix. Can you see that on the screen? Yep.
Yes.
Thanks, guys.
Mhm.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, the required column are documents that the employer must have on file. The Form I-9, W-4 form, job description, and Colorado State Directory of New Hires are federal and state regulated documents that all employers must have on file. What we're going to do is for our attendees, each one of us is going to talk about some of those documents in the required section. I'm going to talk a little bit about the job descriptions. Under Colorado law, the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act, SB 19-085, job descriptions are required to be in each of the employee's personnel file for that position. The job description provides an outline of the essential functions of the job, ensuring that the Americans with Disabilities Act guidelines are being followed. It also provides information to the employees as to the additional responsibilities, location, salary range, benefits, and other important components of the job description. Under W. Garnett and Associates best practice, these are documents that we recommend employers should have. They include employee business references, company applications, employment offer letter, emergency contact form, letter of reference, exempt employee performance appraisal form, non-exempt performance appraisal form, self-assessment worksheet, performance improvement plan. This is the acronym for PIP, and employee career development worksheets. Documents that are deemed, if applicable, such as drug tests, non-solicitation, confidentiality agreements, and employee background screenings are documents that the employee may be required to provide as additional information for that specific position. Under the don't retain in the personnel file, this is part of the questionnaire that we had earlier today. These documents such as Form I-9, Colorado State Directory of New Hires, and employee background screenings are documents that should be filed in its own binder and stored in a filing cabinet. And if you want to, Dean, you can take that down now.
Good, thank you.
Okay, just a couple other things I want to share with you. Employee health records are other medically related documents that warrant a separate folder. Medical files typically contain documents like doctor's notes, drug screening results, family and medical leave paperwork, and anything else related to the employee's well-being. All medical documents should be housed in its own folder that contain a medical document related to the employee. And what we do here at W. Garnett and Associates, we strongly recommend to our clients that they have like a manila folder that they house all that medical information in there, because that's information under HIPAA regulations and things like that, that should be kept and stored in a safe place. Okay, when you are tasked with keeping employee records, there are some three things you should avoid when setting up a filing system to ensure you are meeting legal requirements. Avoid combining the files of employees. Employee A should not have information in employee B's file. Purging employees' information too early and giving unapproved access to confidential files. That's just some of the information I want to share with our group today regarding our attendees, regarding employee personnel information.
That's great. Thanks, Ron. So our poll, our first poll, if you remember right, which is the most important document to have in every employee file, we gave you I-9, W-4, job description, and employment offer letter. And as you saw from the matrix, you have to have all four of those in the file, right? So is one more important than another? Perhaps. We've already heard from Wes that there are big financial consequences to not having I-9s or correctly completed I-9s. But the truth is, if you're responsible for the employee files, you need to really make sure that all four of those documents are in there. And then the second poll, which document should not be kept in the file? Ron already spoke to that. So everybody knew that the employee medical record should not be kept in the file, but we gave you I-9, employee medical records, and the Colorado State Directory of New Hires. And the correct answer for that poll question was all of the above. All three of those documents should be kept separately, as Ron described, in a separate folder for that individual employee too. So hopefully that gives you guys some insight that it's not, what we think we know is probably correct, but there's always new laws and regulations and things that change. So don't lose sight of that. Before we move on, Kate asks a question. I think we've already addressed it, but I want to put it out to the panel. Would the I-9 background screening, etc., be housed separately? Housed together, but separately from the personnel file, or should those documents be individually kept separately? If that makes sense. So those three, can they be put together but in a separate folder, or do you need to have those all individually separately?
Those documents, what we do is we when you're talking about medical information and things like that, drug screens and things like that, those documents, I-9 forms, they're housed in a separate binder and put them in a filing cabinet. That's to ensure the safety and security of those documents.
Okay. So in that binder, would you have a section for each employee? So we have, let's say, Wes's sort of main employee folder, and then we have his, let's say, confidential separate folder. Is that how that would work, or do you have all those documents individual?
Dean, it's a great question. My opinion is they should all be kept separate. And one of the reasons why, the Form I-9 typically are reviewed by ICE, Immigration Custom Enforcement, or the Justice Department. ICE doesn't have any legal right to be looking into someone's personnel file. Their mission is the I-9 related documents and E-Verify.
Gotcha.
If you're housing all of those in one place, you're giving them access to documents that they normally wouldn't have access to.
Understood. So what I'm hearing you say is all the I-9s would be together, separate from everything else. So then you
Yes.
can call that folder, if you will, on all your employees' I-9s are together, but they're separate from all the other documentation.
Kind of going to like the idea of a need to know basis. Whatever agency oversees that form, that's all they need to know. They don't need to know about background. They don't need to know anything else, just the forms that they oversee, which, as Wes said, the I-9, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor, and Department of Justice are three agencies that overlook that.
Okay. So it's not just as simple as creating two folders for every employee. The personnel file and other. You've got to really think about how you maintain those other documents and how you keep them together. Okay, very good. I think that answered that question. I have another question Sarah brings up. If mistakes are made on the electronic I-9 form, what can we do to remedy that?
One of the things, if they have the ability, because on the I-9 form, you can audit them periodically, which you should do, and you can make corrections. Kept electronically, I would be hesitant if I'm making changes, because you could be removing a date. What you don't want to do is remove dates. If I had to make a change to an electronic version, I would print it out and physically make that change by drawing a single line through it and making the correction that needs to be made.
Okay.
And let's suppose it's a date. And if you're changing that whole date, that would concern me, because when the initial I-9 was done on this date, and it may have been, and we're going to discuss that when we get to the I-9 portion, if it wasn't correct and you go in and change, you could be falsifying the document, in my mind.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So
And I would think,
electronically, I would be somewhat concerned what I did electronically.
and to my knowledge too, that, from an electronic perspective, which is kind of my world, the electronic onboarding aspect of these forms, where if you have a modern, HCM, HR technology system, people are, when they're onboarding, they're completing their portion of the I-9 electronically. And ever since 2013, you can digitally sign the I-9. So now it could be completely paperless. But to Wes's point, I think once you sign that document, it date stamps it, and I don't think you can change it short of, doing like Wes said, printing it, manually correcting it, and consulting with your HR consultant vendor about doing the right things.
Yeah. There's so much benefit to moving to the electronic world, right? But they also add some limitations too. So Jim Baker asked a question, and John, this may be one that lands in your world because it's related to payroll systems. So the question is this: our payroll system allows new hires to complete their W-4 electronically during onboarding. What requirement, if any, do we have to also have a hard copy of that W-4?
Yeah, we kind of touched on this earlier too. I honestly, I don't think there is a requirement to have a paper version in a file cabinet. It's more of a comfort level issue. The key point is having access, easy access to it, where if in case of an investigation, which is more probably of an I-9 issue, but
Right.
just having access to that document in quick turnaround so you can produce it in the time frame given. So you could be all paperless on the W-4, having access to it and making sure that you are very selective about who has access to it. And, if you're on a modern system, they can be very specific about user access levels and permissions. But
Okay.
so it could be paperless. It just, it's
Okay.
comfort level. If you want a paper backup, go for it. Just protect those documents.
So it's comfort level preference versus regulatory. Okay, that makes sense. Good. All right, let's keep moving because we've got obviously some more to cover here. So the next topic we're going to dig a little deeper into for our attendees today is the I-9. We've already talked about what maybe seems like a very simple form has a lot of ramifications if you don't handle it well. So Wes, let me hand this off to you and hit the highlights of the of the I-9, and we'll see what questions come from that.
Thanks, Dean. In Wes's humble opinion, I think the I-9 is the most important document that's associated with the employee new hire paperwork. There aren't too many documents that have fines and penalties associated with them in the personnel file. So with the I-9, it's a required federal form for all employees. And the form must be presented within a 72-hour time frame from either the Justice Department, ICE, or the Department of Labor. Those are the departments that audit the form. Employers are held solely responsible for the information on the I-9, even though there are other individuals that have a responsibility in filling out the form. The employer's held responsible. And when you look at the I-9, there are a lot of small nuances that I would like to mention to the attendees. And one of the big ones that that employers are still doing is they're requiring specific documents from the employee. That's part of the anti-discrimination of the I-9 form. The employee, him or herself, are responsible for providing the documents they want to provide if it's a part of the acceptable documents list. And I'll go into more depth a little bit later. The employee should not be asking for specific documents. Once the employee provides those documents, it becomes the responsibility of the employer to make sure, again, that that document that they're accepting and they should be reviewing is a part of the acceptable documents list. Dean, would you show the I-9, at least section 1 of the I-9?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that should be up on the screen. Let me scroll just a little bit here. Section 1.
That's perfect. Section 1 is the employee section. Employers do not fill out any part of that section. That is left to the employee. The important parts of section 1 are the names, last, first, middle, and if the employee has used any other name, the address, city, town, state, zip code, and birth date. And take a look at, in the date of birth box, how the date is represented. That is the #1 violation on the I-9. If an employee is like me, I abbreviate everything.
Yep.
If the date on the I-9 and everywhere you see the date will be represented double-digit month, double-digit day, 4-digit year. If it's represented any other way, that's a $2,156 fine. So as we're going through this, as we're going through the presentation, look at all the places where you represent the date.
So just as an example, right, May the 6th, if we just did 5-6 instead of doing 0506, that's two times. Is that correct?
No, that's just one. If
That's-
any
so that's
part
one-
of the day, any part of the day. So if you put 050621 instead of 2021, that box now has just caused you to pay $2,156.
And every time they do that on the form, it's another $2,100.
Exactly. You're exactly correct.
Right.
And you'll see as we go through the forms, all of the places where a date is required.
Yep.
Now, the social security number is optional if you're not using E-Verify. So the employee does not have, even though it's in the employee section, they don't have to fill out the social security number, email address, or the phone number if a company is not using E-Verify. If you're using E-Verify, the social security number is mandatory.
So Wes, is that on the employer to say we are using E-Verify, therefore you have to complete that box, or how does that work? How would the employee know?
That's what the employer should inform the employee of.
Okay,
Yeah,
very good.
that we do, our company utilizes E-Verify. And so when you get to that part of your section, make sure you're putting the correct social security number there.
Very good. Okay.
Another important area is making sure that the employee, perfect, Dean, identifies their citizenship immigration status, one of those 4 boxes. In 2021, that was a $3,200 fine for someone not indicating that.
Wow. So between one date mistake and not checking one of these boxes, you're almost $5,500 in fines.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, and now
And again,
you
this is
see
the
how they
reason
got to
why
$85,000 on that one example.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Four employees plus an employer. It adds up really quickly, clearly. Yeah.
It adds up quickly. And make sure if you're using boxes 2, 3, and 4, that you, the employer, are checking that document that's being presented and you're getting in the right numbers.
Okay.
Because under the immigration, under 2, 3, and 4, there are certain documents that if the employee is showing you them, they have numbers associated with them.
Right.
So just make sure you're indicating the numbers.
So Wes, I have a question for you on this. And I've worked with business owners that have remote employees. And how would they verify, I don't know, let's say looking at a passport or something like that? Is a picture or photograph of that document adequate? How can they do that if they're not physically in the same room with that individual?
Dean, that's an excellent question for remote employees. Fortunately now, I think until, and Ron help me here, I think until the end of July with COVID, we don't have to verify the documents face to face, hold the documents.
Okay.
I could send you my passport, and that's representation of who I am.
Send you a picture of it. Is that?
I can send you the picture. Yeah,
Okay.
I can email a picture over to you, and that's acceptable. But once we're back in the office, at some point, all of those employees whose document you didn't physically hold in your hand, you have to do that. You have to verify it.
Okay.
You have to verify it.
Because that's been a challenge, I know, for employers for a long time. Maybe they're in construction or whatever. They've got guys out on job sites that never come physically into the office. So it's always been a bit of a challenge, I think, in certain situations.
And one of the things that we recommend to our remote employees is go to your bank. Have the document notarized.
Ah, okay.
That notary will become your representative.
Very good.
And what they're notarizing is they did see that document that was presented by West Garnett. So that's one of the way your bank or a notary.
Okay.
The
So
next important part of section 1.
sorry, let me ask you a quick question, because this
Yeah.
question just came in regarding the ID, if you will. So Ronald is asking, IDs that we use to ID, do we make a copy of them? Is this a good idea?
It's a good, yes, I think it's a very good idea. Because if you're making a copy, you had to physically take that document somewhere to make a copy. So again, it's protection. But what you have to be careful of is you can't make the documents on some employees and not others. If you're making a decision that you're making photos of documents, you have to be consistent and do it with everyone.
Gotcha.
With everyone.
Okay.
And that becomes, if audited, that becomes a part of documents related to the Form I-9.
Very good. Okay, that makes sense. Good, thank you for that.
Just to chime in real quick on that too, if an employer, just an FYI, of course, if an employer is receiving a document, some kind of a list document or something related to immigration, anything remotely, it's not being presented, it would behoove the employer to have a secure way to receive that so that people aren't just emailing it. You don't want that stuff sitting in your inbox. You don't want it sitting in their sent folders, just FYI.
Okay, yeah, a secure way to drop documents into something. Yeah, okay, very good. Thanks, John.
Okay, John, Dean, the other part of section 1 is the employee signature. It says signature of employee and today's date. And again, that's another place where you may need to make sure how you're represented.
$2,100.
$2,156, a little over $2,100. So protect that because you can. The next part of the form is employees might not be able to complete that form his or herself, so they'll use a preparer or translator.
Yep.
That one of those two boxes has to be completed. Either the employee will complete that, or it's going to be followed up and completed by the employer if the employee didn't use a preparer or translator. If a translator or preparer is used, you can see the information they need to present. And you see there's a date there. That's another place where the date's represented.
There we go. Yep.
Could you go to page 2? Page 2 is the employer's responsibility as well as the representative. In some cases, we are the employer's representative for them. So we're responsible for completing this form for them. It's important that the employee information from section 1 is indicated. It's critical, it's extremely critical that the documents you are receiving will fall into list A, B, or C. A list A document provides identity and employment authorization. If they don't have a list A document, they should be providing a combination of documents, a B and a C.
Yep.
A B shows identity, a C shows employment authorization. Please be careful that you're not accepting a list A and they're providing you another document, B and C, that you're indicating on the forms. That's a no-no. You're asking or you're indicating too many documents. If I've given you a List A document, I'm satisfying identity and employment eligibility. So don't indicate anything else but List A.
So in this
Because
case, more is not better. This is
More is terrible on the I-9.
how much is that going to cost me?
Well, I don't know, but I did receive guidance because that was happening in a lot of places.
Ah, okay.
That employers were putting List A documents and a B or a C document with the List A.
Okay. So
And just to chime in real fast, Dean,
yeah, go ahead. For it.
and make the attendees aware as far as when they're hiring, they're not in any way to tell the employee, the potential employee, what documents they need to bring in under List A, B, and C. They make that decision for themselves. If they're going to bring documents from List A, then that's fine. If they're going to bring documents from List B and C, that's fine. But it's up to them to decide what documents they want to present to the employer during orientation.
Got it. Yeah. So you can't sway an employee to bring a particular document as an employee.
That is correct.
Exactly. And that's a good point, Ron, and thank you. And another thing the employer has to be comfortable with is making sure you're putting List A documents in List A. I've had cases where List A documents were in List B or List C documents were in List A. Those are also potential violations.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then again, make sure in that list, you're putting the document title in the title page, the issuing authority, the document number. That it's small, but it's critical. Done incorrectly, there are fines. Yeah, and you can see that some of those will have dates. Most of them will have dates on them.
Right. Yep. Good. Lots of what seems like a simple form that we've seen 1,000 times. There's a lot of gotchas in there if you ever get audited, for sure.
There's a lot of guys. Scroll down a little bit more, Dean,
Yeah.
because I'm going to wrap this up here. Another important part, scroll up just a little bit, right? The certification. The employer has to indicate the employee's first day. And again, you have to put a date there. And then under the certification, the employee has to fill out all of the other information in Section 2. Section 3, if you're going to re-verification process or rehire process, make sure you're reading the regulations, because again, there's some got-yous in there if you're doing it incorrectly.
Okay.
What we normally recommend on a rehire, we just do a brand new I-9. That way I know I'm looking at the latest documents. We don't use the re-verification rehire section. I will just go ahead and do a complete new I-9.
Yeah. Well, and if you're not using the most current I-9 form, there's a lot of things that potentially could get you there too. Yeah.
And people, you have to keep the I-9 1 year after the date of hire. 1 year after the date of separation and 3 years after the date of hire, or whichever is longest. So when a person separates, add 12 months onto that date, because if audited, you're going to have to show that document, even though the employee is no longer a part of the company.
Gotcha. Yeah. Very good, Wes. Thank you. That's a good overview of the I-9. And in the interest of time, we'll just keep moving on. We've got about 15 minutes left. So we're going to spend a little time on the W-4 and then a little time on the new hires form as well. And then hopefully we'll have a few minutes left for Q&A. But again, attendees, keep throwing your questions at us as we go. All right, so I'm going to hand it off to John. Give us your words of wisdom on the W-4, please.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, it's a hard act to follow. The W-4, maybe not as fraught with peril, but still there are some things everyone needs to know. And The IRS Form W-4, otherwise known as the Employees Withholding Certificate, it's also, a document everybody has seen. But in 2020, as you may be aware, the IRS changed the W-4 significantly, removing withholding allowances. So starting in 2020, you notice that the ability to say, single and zero, married and two, that has been removed. And that's a follow-up to changes in tax law that took effect in 2018. So the employer must have employees complete their initial W-4, note that I said initial, either at the time of hire or up to their first date of work, otherwise known as first date of employment. And actually on that note, pull up that form if you would, Dean.
Sure.
So the W-4 is made effective when wages are paid to the employee. And the purpose of the W-4 is for the employee to communicate to the employer their tax withholding status or exemption from income tax withholding prior to their first payday with the company. To quote the IRS, though, the amount of income tax withholding must be based on filing status and withholding adjustments as indicated on the form. In other words, employees should follow the instructions on that form and be truthful about how they complete it. Employees should also use their W-4 to update their tax withholding status as the need arises. So they fill out their initial W-4 and then they move, they change address, they get married, have children. That could affect their withholding, and thus they probably need to update that form. And so when employees update their W-4, they should also date the form where indicated down on step 5. Yep, down if you scroll down, there you go. So in step 5, they indicate they should date that form to reflect the date when they updated their W-4. So when they fill it out the first time, they date it. Down the road, their status changes. They fill out a new W-4, date it for that date. Now, the employer would still have the same first date of employment because that hasn't changed. That goes in the bottom. So that stays the same, but people are dating it. And that's a backup. So the employer has a record of when did they change their status? When did they move? When did they change their marital status? Well, the date on the form will tell you. And so I guess from there, I have some other information and takeaways, but
I see a question coming, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's funny, Kate asked the question, it was on my mind too.
Sure.
My question was, this form, it sounds like this form is the responsibility of the employee, not the employer, in terms of updates. And Kate asks the same question, but slightly differently. If we are aware of a life change that would prompt an update to the form, are we able to ask for an updated form, or is this the employee's responsibility for changing if a status changed? So how does this work? Are we responsible as employers to make sure it's updated, or is it on the employee to make sure, because it has implications to them, so with their withholdings and tax?
Yeah, I'd also like to get the other panelists' take on this. My view is ultimately this form is an employee-driven form in terms of the employee has the responsibility. The employer isn't necessarily going to know, did somebody move? Do they have children in their lives now? I mean, whatever would change their withholding status, the employee is the one who knows that, of course. And so I personally feel that responsibility falls on the employee. Now, if the employer knows about it, I don't know what Ron and Wes think about if an employer knows about it and just saying, hey, just you got married recently, you moved, maybe you want to fill out a new W-4. I think the address part is probably easy to ask for. The other stuff in terms of withholding and something that changes their status, employers want to be careful about, giving tax advice or directing people. What do you guys think?
And John, I think you're right on the money. If the employer becomes aware of the change, I think it's the employer's responsibility to say, hey, employee, I know you got married. Might that affect your current withholding? If so, please make sure you go in, especially if you're electronic, go in and make that change in the system.
Yep. because in the end, you know, the employee is the one responsible for making those changes. And, you know, in the end, somebody not making changes, it might all be, you know, fixed at tax time. They might owe a lot more money, or they might get a refund. I mean, those things will happen, but yeah, the employer has to be careful just to, you know, they could bring up the issue and leave it up to the employee to make that decision. But until the employer gets this updated form dated for when it's changed, then they keep their payroll records and the employee's payroll withholding profile exactly the same.
Right.
They should never make changes to an employee's withholding profile verbally, not just, you know, word of mouth, not just an email. If somebody wants to make a change, they present a new W-4, period.
Yeah. So it's driven by the employee, but it sounds like the employer can say, hey, you know, this, we understand this thing may impact, you know, or you've had a change in life, you may want to look at your W-4, but beyond that, certainly not giving tax advice is good advice, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless you're a CPA, right? Maybe that's the only time where you can use tax advice. Very good. Let's see. We have another question coming. Okay, so yes, we are going to provide a recording of the webinar today. Okay. Any other thoughts, John, on the W-4? If not, we'll move on, as we've just got a few minutes to wrap this thing up.
Yep. One final thought, and this comes up. If somebody using this form, where again, you know, the form indicates if steps 2 through 4 don't apply to you, skip, and it's okay to leave it blank because they don't apply. But if somebody is using this form to communicate that they feel they're exempt from withholding, then their situation changes. The IRS wants them to submit a new W-4 every year until that non-exemption, or until that exemption rather changes. So while they are claiming exemption from withholding, employees are required to turn in a new W-4 every year until they're no longer, if they go back to being subject to withholding, then they don't have to do it every year.
Okay, very good. That's good to know. Excellent. All right, so we're going to round this out with our Colorado new hires form. So Wes, I'm going to hand this back to you. If you could hit the highlights in the next 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll leave a couple of minutes for a wrap up.
Perfect. Thanks again, Dean. The Colorado State Directive New Hire, that is a state required document that has to be completed on every hire, new hire, or rehire. And in some cases, the employee will not see this form. It becomes the responsibility of the employer to make sure the form is completed. It's the employer's responsibility. And in fact, a good best practice is you can go online and on the form. Dean, could you bring the form up real quick? There's a website where you can go online to access the form. And the employer needs to make sure that the employee mandatory information is there and the employer mandatory information is there. And again, one good recommendation is under the employer information mandatory is to fill that out right now. Have that completed with your FIN number, with the address, all of that information, have that in there. So all you have to do when you have a new hire is have the new hire fill out their portion, or you fill it out for them.
Got it. Yep.
And again, John, any recommendations for those folks who are utilizing this form, the paper version of the form?
Yeah, you know, I want to chime in on this. So, well, and as we talked about, and this form, admittedly, I was not as familiar with, because from my point of view, payroll providers typically handle this process and can remove this form as an obligation for employers because the data might be generated electronically out of their systems. But this form, some takeaways, this form can contain multiple employees' sensitive data on one form. So it is going back to the earlier best practice of keeping this separate. You don't want this form commingled with other forms because now you've got more than one employee's sensitive data in one employee's file, a big no-no. And employers should not assume that their payroll provider is automatically handling reporting of new hire data. Most are. They do it all differently. And I'll tell you, most of them do it manually, by the way. They send batches of data, so they don't necessarily use this form. But employers should always, always confirm that the new hire data is going to the directory, and make sure their provider is doing it. If you're doing payroll in-house, it's probably an assumption that it's not going to happen, and this might be in your lap. But if you're using a payroll service, you should confirm they are sending this data to the Colorado, DOL OES, the Office of Economic Security.
Good.
All right, very good. So this may be a little bit of a new process or a new form for some of the attendees. So make sure that you are covering all your bases, attendees, with the state directory. All right, very good.
And just a final thought on that, people should remember too, they only have 20 days to report this information after hiring someone, 20 days. So make sure if their new payroll provider is sending it, make sure they're not sending it monthly, because that could leave them out of compliance.
Oh, okay. All right, Michelle does ask a question. What if you have remote employees who do not live in the state of Colorado?
You don't have to fill out one on a person that's not a part of Colorado. But in 46 states, they have something similar to the directory of new hire.
Gotcha. Okay.
This form basically is to make sure that child support payments, the government, the state knows where they are if they have garnishment and those types of things. And the last time I checked, 46 of the states had a similar form to the Colorado State Directory of New Hire. And if so,
yeah,
they're going to have to make sure the out-of-state employee is filling out that state form. That's going to have to be a part of their
whatever their work state is. Yep. And all states do it differently. Kind of underscores the reason to work with a payroll service, because usually they will handle this for the client, so the client doesn't have to go figure out what form they have to use in a different state.
Yeah.
But
very good. Good question. Thank you. All right. So we're going to stop sharing that, and we are going to wrap it up, folks. So appreciate everybody's time today. We covered a lot of ground. Hopefully we got a lot of questions answered. What we will do over the next week, we'll get the recording of the video. We'll get that posted and shared with everybody that RSVP'd. I will ask everybody in the chat, if you're interested in getting a copy of the matrix for the personnel file, just put a quick yes in the chat and we'll make sure we get that to you as well. I already see some yeses coming in. Thanks, Kate and Kerry, Becky. I know that's a good, and Michelle, I see you there. This is a West Garnett or W. Garnett and Associates proprietary form. So it's something they've put together over a long period of time. So it's top secret. Don't share it with anybody. It's like, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we will know. No, I'm just kidding.
Right, yeah, it costs you $50 a book. No. So in all seriousness, hopefully it's a really, really good a reference for you to have, a good cheat sheet, print it out, have it available. We will share that with the attendees as well. Michelle, Ronald, I see you there. Thank you. And with regard to the other forms, obviously those are state or federally available forms. You should be able to get those with a quick Google. If you need them, let us know. We're happy to send you copies of those as well. And with that, anything left to cover, Wes, John, or Ron, before we wrap this thing up?
Just quickly, Dean, if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. We're available to answer those questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
we love to help, because it's a brave new world, and we want to keep everybody compliant and let them have some peace of mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, very good. Well, you can see our panelists' email addresses in their backgrounds. I'm sure most of you know our panelists anyway, but again, please reach out anytime. We will definitely be responsive to your questions. And we are going to, I'm sure we'll be planning another one of these. This is the second in our series of Lunch and Learns. They're every 2 or 3 months or so. So if you have topics you'd like us to consider covering, email one of the panelists and let us know what you'd like us to talk about. We want this to be of value to you. And with that, it is 1 o'clock, and I will let everybody get on with the rest of their afternoon. Thanks for attending, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye now.